Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Upon a Heathen Path. Today, it's going to be a solo one. And I'm going to take this chance and opportunity to talk about something that's pretty important to me. And we don't talk about it enough. You won't hear me talk about it a whole lot. But we're going to talk about mental health in today's world and how our Norse ancestors dealt with mental health as well. Now, some background for you guys on me. I didn't have a terrible childhood growing up. I had loving parents, but I had very tough parents. I was a only child, and my parents they've been together the entirety of my life. They still are together. I'm 36 years old, and they're still married to this day. Now, they do have some similarities that they need to work out, but that's their own deal. Now, from what I've dealt with, I was the one to break the cycle of that, not bad parenting, but incorrect parenting, right? Or incorrect emotional support for a child growing up. Even in an athletic home, which I had growing up in, was a very athletic home. You know, I wrestled, played baseball, football, I raced motocross, and just very, very competitive home. And to deal with losing or not winning wasn't something I was equipped with, right? It was always get over it. Don't cry about it. Don't deal with it. Don't talk about it. Just move the fuck on. And I never got to sit with that. You never get to sit with your emotions in an atmosphere like that, and you just suppress them. And then it becomes issues later on in life. So again, I didn't have a bad childhood, but my parents didn't have great ones either. They had way worse than I did. And it shows in their parenting styles, which it's a lot better now because I've been able to, again, like I said, break the cycle and address those issues with them and to break that silence, right? Like enough's enough. Like I'm a grown man. I'm not going to be treated this way, or I'm not going to have to deal with this past that's no longer existent, but it still does exist. It still affects me to this day. And when we talk about mental health today, we use words like anxiety, depression, trauma, burnt out. But the human mind doesn't suddenly start struggling in the modern age. You know, fear, grief, obsession, rage, despair. Those have been feelings and emotions that have been lived through this life in this world in a long before our existence, even in the Viking Age too. And they didn't call them illnesses. They called them things like fate or honor. Then they called it madness, grief, or weird, or just the way of the world. And today we're going to talk about how the Norse understood the mind, how they responded to psychological suffering, and what we've gained and lost, and how we handle mental health today. So the first question is, did the Norse believe in mental health? And they didn't separate the mind from the body the way we often do now today. Modern medicine has made leaps and bounds and advances. So there was no clinical, psychological, or diagnoses, no therapy rooms, for them to take advantage of. But that doesn't mean that mental health wasn't or mental suffering wasn't ignored. It was very, very much to light. So you have words in Old Norse culture that were the self-used or made up of multiple parts. So like hugar, thought, intention, emotion. These are all very positive words we're going to be talking about here. And hamir, shape or form. So a shape or form of how you feel kind of thing. And then Fela, a spirit companion reflecting inner nature, and Orlag, or one's personal fate. And these concepts throughout saga literature and Old Norse linguistic usage, where emotional disturbance is framed as imbalance or disruption rather than illness. And I resonate with that heavily. It feels so imbalanced. So for me, I'm well medicated, and an unmedicated Eric is self-loathing. Right? Self-interest. Very much just does not like myself, and that's the competitive side. Like, I don't feel like I'm winning anymore, but I am. And realistically, I am. I'm winning. I'm winning creating this podcast. I'm winning at being a father. I'm winning at being a partner to my girlfriend. And overall, like, I've got a good life. It's hard. It's very hard. But no one's got an easy life, I don't think. Like, and if you do, then I feel bad for you. I feel bad that you've never had to suffer in any way, you know. But you see in the Poetic Edda, when someone suffered emotionally, it wasn't in their head. You know, it was something out of balance in a whole person, or in the person as a whole, right? And I feel like that makes it more acceptable to yourself instead of saying, I have an illness. No, I have an imbalance. Just there's a disruption and I need to fix it. And that's why we have the gods that we can conjure to, right? Or invoke and then communicate with and then give our thoughts to. They're not going to give us the answers. They never, but they will give us that reassurance that we are fucking better and that we're going to be okay. And whatever it is fate, but we can change how we feel about it is kind of the message. And this holistic understanding of out of balance of the self is discussed extensively in medieval Icelandic sources and modern scholarships analyzing Norse conceptions of identifying in psychology. So like Armin Jacobsen in The Fearless Viking and then Preben Sorensen. They write heavily about things like that. And we talk about grief, right? Going into the emotions of grief, depression, and silence. There's one very, very specific saga that talks about grief in the Norse world was expected, but only to a certain point, right? Sorry, I'm getting very thirsty. Quick little segue. We finished bottling the rest of the mead, and I cannot wait. I just cannot wait. I can't wait to make my next batch. It's been an experience of like failure and learning and how I'm going to improve on this next batch. So I've invested a little bit more in my equipment. So I bought an auto siphoner to help with reducing the amount of less that it gets into the bottling process, but neither here nor there. But just quick, I just wanted to throw that plug up in there. But in the Egil saga, where you see in the Skala Grimsir, Egil Skallagrimsson falls into a deep despair, deep depression, isolating himself after the death of his sons. He refuses food. He withdraws from life and altogether withdraws from everything. And he wants to die. Like, he wants to die. That is his feeling, is like, he has nothing to live for. Why should I be here? And behavior, modern scholars frequently identify as a historical example of severe grief or depression withdrawal. And that's sad. And what's great about this is that we do see in chapters 78 and 79 in the Skala Grimsir that he is actually saved. And what saves him, it's not comfort, it's but poetry. And I feel like saving yourself or comforting yourself, it's hard to do because you're already in a terrible mindset. But poetry is just an example of seeing the better in life. So his daughter manipulates him into composing a lament or forcing verbal expressions of grief. And we see scholars cite that it's evidence of poetry function as emotional regulation or social reintegration in Norse culture. I believe that's more relative to self, or we could kind of link that to like writing down self-affirmations. But we're writing down, like, Dad, you need to write down your emotions. And you see that in this saga by Jesse Byock in the Viking Age, Iceland, this is one of the clearest historical examples of complicated grief, emotional shutdown, creative expression as regulation. And it's no different than going to the gym to regulate your emotions, or painting, or other forms of art, poetry, journalism, going for a run. You know, it's just examples. But notice this, that no one in the chapter 78 or 79, you never see anyone ask him how he feels. No one helps him, right? They don't communicate with him. They just say, you have to re-engage in life. You have to keep moving on. You have to push this aside. They push him to function again. And that's hard. That's hard to do when you're already feeling down and you're given more outside negative energy to push yourselves to do something that you don't physically or mentally feel like you're capable of doing at that point. And saga literature constantly reflects a cultural expectation that grief can be overcome through action or expressions rather than emotional processing as we understand it today, right? And then suffering's acknowledged, or was acknowledged, but what was really the point of them pushing him to function again, That's the envision that endurance was the most honorable thing. Right. And you see the madness side of it where you can, or rage, where you can almost tie a similarity of berserkers into this story, or in this mental struggle. And one of the most misunderstood psychological states in Norse culture is the berserker rage, right? And berserkers are often portrayed as wild, frothing madmen and just uncontrollable, just animals. And the truth is, they suggest it's something more complex. And accounts in sagas and later medieval writings describe berserkers entering a deliberate altered states associated with battle, fearness, and pain suppression. So it's a state of mind that they've put themselves into. They've put themselves into it. They've learned how to regulate themselves in a different manner, right? And H.R. Ellis Davidson, when he wrote God Myths of Northern Europe, kind of touches on that heavily. And they entered an altered mental state, possibly through breathing work, ritual, trauma conditioning, or substances to override fear and pain, which sometimes they would. They would take hallucinogenics to put their mind or their body in that state of pain fearing and pain suppression, right? But Neil Price argues that berserker behavior aligns closely with ritualized trance states and socially structured disassociation rather than random madness. And I believe that. That's how I would view a berserker, is you're not, like, you got to have some sound of mind. You have to have some mental awareness of yourself, some self-awareness that it's not just madness, because then you're just going to go off and just, axe off your cohorts and your brothers in arms. And I just can't see that it's a state of madness or uncontrollable rage. It's got to be something you've put yourself into, you've trained yourself to do. And it's not random violence. It was socially sanctioned disassociation, right? So it's combat disassociation. It's adrenaline-induced trance. It's a trauma-linked emotional flooding. Like, they're making themselves go into this state, but it's a controlled state. Again, trauma-like emotional flooding or adrenaline-induced. Like, we are releasing chemicals that we know chemicals in our body to be better in battle. I mean, I can't put it in a more simpler way. That was the whole point of the Berserker. I feel like they were ultimate warriors, right? Who have not placed themselves, but put themselves in a different state of category as a Viking goes. And the Norse didn't try to eliminate these states. They contained them within ritual, role, and meaning. You give it a meaning, you give it a role, it's a little more controllable, especially if you want it on your side. You want a berserker on your side. And this containment is a reoccurring theme in anthropologic interpretations of Viking age warfare. And we go to the magical side of it, the holistic side. You see cedar or trance or healing psyche. And then cedar magic was a form of the Norse, like we all know, deeply tied to trance and prophecy and emotional states. Excuse me. And descriptions of cedar in the saga Eric the Red depict ritual trance induction, chanting, and altered consciousness, and an emotional intensity used to address misfortune and uncertainty. And practitioners often women, mostly women, because there was a thing for that. They were called, vulvas, entered altered consciousness to diagnose misfortune or address emotional distress and reframe trauma as fate or warning. And this is what I could find, our first form of therapy. Our first therapists that were evil witches. Imagine that. And Neil Price identifies cedars as culturally accepted framework for experiencing, interpreting, and containing psychological ways or in psychological distress. But it wasn't therapy in a modern sense, but it gave suffering meaning. So however you want to look at it, I see that as your closest thing to therapy for that state of the state of the world. And anthropological and psychological studies constantly show meaning making as a stabilizing factor in human mental health, that something ritualized that cedar magic provided. Meaning is one of the strongest psychological stabilizers humans have. Like, we are always looking for something to mean, or a meaning and a purpose. Like, we are prone creatures to always find a reason or a meaning and to intensify why we feel the way we feel, or why the grieving and the suffering is so intense, or why is it so dull? Like why are we dealing with so much empathetic or apathetic feeling? And interestingly enough, male participation in cedar was stigmatized, right? Not because it didn't work, but because emotional vulnerability threatened rigid masculine norms. I still see that to this day, where men in traditionally female roles are criticized, they're scrutinized, right? And vice versa. You see women in men's roles, traditional men's roles, and they are criticized, they are scrutinized. And it's not doing anything for justice. And the stigma is explicitly discussed in Norse sources that label male cedar practitioners as irgi, or unmanly, or you've even seen it used artiger, which is a very disrespectful term in Norse language. Like, it is like one of the most disrespectful things I could find that you could call somebody. Basically, the word artiger is coward, unmanly, but Norse law gave the accused the right to challenge that person to death by trial, pretty much. So that is a very strong word. So why you don't see it or see men and cedar practitioners is reflecting cultural anxiety around emotional openness falls back to like the Lokasana segment or a saga. It's very familiar because you see that they're in the great shit. There's a gathering of all the gods, and Loki busts in, and he's hammered drunk. He's just off his fucking mind. And he specifically accuses Odin exhibiting Ardga behavior of participating in cedar magic. So if you haven't read the Lokasana, then it's in there. Just it's a very strong way to get your head chopped off. We all know Loki and Odin made a blood pact to be blood brothers. What leads us into how this compares to modern mental health. Today we have language that the Norse didn't. We have very many words and definitions to describe mental suffering, like diagnosis and medication and trauma science and therapy. But we've lost a lot of things along the way. The Norse expected suffering as part of life. We are conditioned now to not really expect suffering. And that's one thing I will never not teach my kids is life's gonna suck. Life is going to be hard. You're going to suffer in some form or some way, but we are going to work through it, right? And you see valued endurance and expression, integrated mind, body, story, and community. And again, so this home is going to be a community, always a community for my kids to always have a safe place to say whatever they want. And I don't mean a safe place to, oh, pat you on the back, or like, that's not real. This isn't going to hurt you. No, like life is going to kick you in the fucking face. And, but we're going to talk about it. You don't need to hide away what you feel. Right? Not what I had to grow up with, and many of us had to grow up with, especially if you are a millennial. We were raised by the worst emotional parents. You can't tell me different. These traits are consistently identified in saga culture and Norse cosmology as a core social values, written by like Bayek and Davidson and Jacobson. But modern culture often, I don't want to say even often, isolate suffering. A lot of us have to deal with that by ourselves. Medicalize or medicinal use without ritual. I don't think it's safe to say medicine doesn't have its place in the mental health world, but there are definitely some that don't work. I've experienced quite a few different medications that have made things worse. And I think I found a chemical balance where I'm okay. I'm like, I can deal with myself. Right? And constantly you see the expectations of constant happiness is normal. Fuck that. Like, if you just walk around this world constantly exhibiting or expecting a constant happiness, dude, you're going to have the worst fucking life ever. And I cannot say that any harder. And disrespectfully, you're a fucking idiot. Like, if you are still to this day as a grown adult, you see it enough. You see, suicide awareness and mental health awareness and all this other awareness stuff. You just walk around thinking like your life, you are to expect constant happiness as a normal. You are just fucking crazy. You are not a berserker. You are beyond any kind of help. You are just full of yourself and almost in a narcissistic way, expecting that you don't deserve to be suffering. And that's my opinion, not medically trained to make that diagnosis of you. But we are better at treatment, but sometimes worse at containment and belonging. It's kind of like you just put this problem in this hand and then this problem in this hand. So you're not really doing a 6-7. Sorry. But what can we learn from this? And the lesson isn't to romanticize in the past, but it's not without fault that we all know the Viking Age was very brutal. There was no safety net. There was nothing like what we have now, the opportunities. And many, even to this day, back then, many people suffered silently and they died too early. And I don't mean early as young, but they died. Obviously that would mean young early, but died before they really fulfilled their fate, or they really fulfilled like their purpose in this world. And this reality is emphasized by historians cautioning against idolizing Norse endurance culture. And I don't want that to make it sound like I don't appreciate endurance through suffering. Like you gain something out of it for sure, but you can't stay there for too long. And I've had many friends who have taken their own lives because they've been in that endurance stage for too long. So when I know I have friends that are still dealing with or starting to deal with bad times and hardship and emotional struggle, I just remind them, don't stay there for too long. I give them reasons why. You have a family, you have a child, you have commitment to this world to be around, right? To be a part of it. And you're not broken because you struggle. Struggling is just part of being human. Like we have to acknowledge it. We have to just start making that the normal. And what matters is whether your suffering has meaning. Does it have expression? Does it have witness? And not silence. And the suffering isn't meant to label or be put as like, we're erasing pain. No, you're not. You're not. You have to deal with it. And it's not going to go away. Like every time you think about that bad scenario or that bad time, like you're going to feel some sort of pain. I hope you do. But I hope you've learned how to deal with it in a better way. Right. And it's like holding the mind fast through it and acknowledging like, your own state it's okay, but I don't need to be here for that long. It's not a great place, but it's not forcing yourself to be happy, but it is forcing yourself to be responsible for your own position in your life. And to leave with that is the Norse didn't ask what's wrong with you. They asked, what fate are you carrying and how will you carry it well? And this worldview aligns with Norse concepts of orlog and personal responsibility within fate in the Poetic Edda. But maybe that's a question still worth asking. So I hope this episode gave you guys some more insight on how or who I am as a person and why I am kind of the way I am, how I view mental health, what I've kind of gone through in life. Like there's a lot that I didn't talk about and maybe one day we'll get there, but that's stuff I'm dealing with. That's my own suffering. I'm giving it meaning, but I'm having a harder time expressing all of it still. But to you, another day that I will be here tomorrow. Well, I hope. God's willing, right? And I hope you guys get to hear this episode all the way through, and I hope it means something to you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you didn't pause and go, this guy's a fucking idiot, which you can do that, but I hope you hit resume too. That'd be kind of cool. But if you guys could, if you liked it, please like, share, follow, either on Spotify or YouTube. Much appreciated, guys, for this episode of Pawnee Heathen Path. It's great talking to you guys. Bye!